We got a wild one over here. I'm going to light our chalice for Sam. Welcome, Pacific Unitarian Church, where Sam and Barbara have been members for a long time. We gather here to honor maybe your father, husband, grandfather, colleague, mentor. We gather here to honor our loss. We gather here to drop memories of earlier days. And we gather here to remember who we are in relation to this fine man you see on your bulletin. You're going to see pictures all throughout the service. We're not going to have, thought those were going to go at the end, but we're just going to see those rotate through the service. So a piece of us will be left here today as we all move forward, and a piece of us will never forget Sam. And I'll light in the Unitarian tradition our chalice. If there's an experience that's bigger than words, it is the death of a loved one, family member, close colleague you worked side by side with. I never met him, but in writing the eulogy, I certainly felt like I did and obviously wanted to. We're going to hear a scrapbook of stories today. Everyone is invited to come down towards the end and light a candle and share your own memory as well. We're going to tread some of those early steps for how people move on with their lives. I know it's been a few months now, but still. And whether you're a Buddhist or you're a Christian or agnostic or atheistic or Unitarian or Jewish or whatever, we all know that life outgrows our separate selves. And about 4 months ago, this life outgrew Samuel. So we have a reflection, we have a eulogy, some other poignant moments for sure. And it's now on us not to shirk the grieving, the seriousness, the stories, the laughter, the pausing in our tracks, which we're doing today, to experience the awe and humility that we've just reached the bookend of a long life lived in the physical form, and a good one too. Let's take a moment of just stillness and listen to the beautiful music Severin's going to play. He's going to play a series of classical pieces throughout our service today, interspersed between our words. Let's just take a minute. Sam, as I need not tell, most of you loved classical music. Let's bow our heads. This will lighten up a little bit too. But let's bow our heads in honor of a man who spent his life on the edge of one tiny area of science, one little rock hold of health that we all rely on. Dear Lord, dear Spirit, dear bottom of our hearts, we thank you for this man who was dedicated to improving the health of humanity and supporting those who followed him and the family and his kids that were his foundation. Few did it better. Dear God, blessed Spirit, great microscope in the sky, we think of you, Samuel. We stop to honor the life that you lived. Blessings to you. Warmth and friendliness will follow you. You are in our hearts, and we will miss you. I get the privilege of telling his story. Sam was born on August 7th, 1926 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He lived there till he was about 6 when his parents separating. He and his mom moved to Riverside, California. This was not a Midwestern vacation to Disneyland that extended into a permanent lifestyle. In 1926, Sam, his mom, and his 2 sisters left Milwaukee in the middle of the Great Depression in an old car in an attempt to regain some of the stability a return to her maternal home might offer. Although Milwaukee was too far north to be part of those classic 1930s Dust Bowl images, it probably didn't feel that much different for his mom, distressed and headed home. Seemingly they left because Sam's dad, like many Americans, lost his wealth and seemingly a lot with it some of the mental stability that took so many in the stock market crash and subsequent depression that defined that whole era. Sam's a Depression-era kid. That must have been hard. He continued to have a relationship with his dad, but that relationship was always challenged by, or often at least, challenged by the cognitive and emotional limitations. Communication was hard between the two. Distance didn't make it any easier, I'm sure. It sounds like Sam's early life was exactly the opposite of the order and the esteem and the dignity that he closed it with. There was research on kids who have lost, in one way or another, parents and have to face great trials early in life. Statistically, most of these kids struggle as you look through when you hit the classic markers of success that we attribute in adulthood. However, although most children are hurt by this trauma, a solid percentage of what we might call at-risk kids today become life's most dogged achievers. It seems that's Sam's story. It seems this laconic man who rarely talked about his childhood found in that childhood some of the grit to professionally persevere, personally too. He was by all accounts a man of few words. It was in Southern California where the rest of his childhood would take place. Upon arriving here, he was left with his maternal grandparents at a tomato farm for quite a bit of time. Spent a lot of time on the farm, driving a tractor around, as I hear. Stories relayed to me from his kids suggest that the decorated medical researcher that we remember today was pretty handy on the farm. In a life lived in a number of places, California, both LA and the Bay Area, places that he would circle back through his whole life. As Sam entered his late teens, 17 to be exact, the U.S. was in the second half of World War II. We'll get some more chairs in here. So the U.S. is in the second half of World War II. He's 17 years old. He served stateside as a medic in the Navy in the last couple years of the war. He would really serve as a medic the whole rest of his life, wouldn't he? Seemingly in these late teens and early 20s, his life was filled with the Naval Hospital in Long Beach and spent days at the City College. He and all of us here, particularly his offspring, more than anyone, are lucky that he was not one of the many killed in World War II. He trained at least some as a soldier, doing training runs on California's dunes as a mock invasion of Japan. He tested out of overseas activity to be a medic, though. Following the war and through a few lingering credits here at home, he left Long Beach to go to UC Berkeley. There, in order to sustain a roof over his head, he was a member and a resident and apparently something of the house cleaner of this well-heeled frat at UCal Berkeley. He graduated with his BS from there in 1949. It was followed by med school, as well as before studies took him to the nearby University of San Francisco. He met Rosalie, a fellow classmate, during this time. Med school was followed up with a role in the pathology department at the university's own Moffitt Hospital. Sam, as I don't need to tell almost all of you, maybe all of you, lived every bit of his long life at the intersection of where medical practice and medical research sort of folded together. Sam and Rosalie married in 1952 during his senior year of med school, and the two proceeded to have 4 kids together. In 1954, the couple departed their collective run of science-based education in California for a residency at New England Deaconess Hospital in Boston. Boston would be the city where their daughter Linda was born, right here today. Boston also turns out to be a city where Christopher, the youngest son, is settled as a pathologist today himself. Following Boston, Sam and his small family went to New Orleans, where they taught at Tulane's medical school long enough to enjoy a few beignets at the Café du Monde before they moved back to the Bay Area. This time Sam returned to the Bay Area. He wasn't a bright-eyed student anymore. He was a medical professional established in his career. Sam, Rosalie, and Linda settled into Orinda, suburb of San Francisco, and during this time, the Dr. French that we pay tribute to was the chief resident and an instructor in pathology at San Francisco General Hospital. He'd be back in the Bay Area where Scott, Leslie, and Sandy were all born. After 13 years of marriage, the couple divorced. In the early 60s, he met Barbara. He'd be married to Barbara until his death. Fortunately for him and all of us, that would not be for another 55 years. The joy of their new life together would be stung when his youngest daughter, Sandy, passed early in childhood. An event Sam struggled with his whole days. Barbara and Samuel met when Barbara interviewed for a job at Sam's lab. He hired her, but they worked in separate buildings. It was not long before their association that began professionally turned romantic, and within a couple of years, these two were married at the UU Church in Berkeley. During this time, Barbara and Samuel lived in downtown San Fran, and in those early years, when Sam's kids were still young, Sam and Barbara would visit Linda, Scott, Leslie, and their relatively newborn Sandy, who lived in Orinda. It was in San Fran in 1966 that Barbara and Samuel's firstborn son, Samuel, was born. We'll hear from him today. Just a few years later in LA, after Sam had gotten a job at Harbor UCLA, they moved. Christopher was born not far from here. And they lived in a house not far from here on Via La Salva. It was among 1,000 new connections in Southern California that would sustain them. It would be their first connection to the church we stand in today. Although the South Bay would eventually become their permanent home, other professional adventures would pull them around. Sam was always tempted and awaited, other offers and pushed and pulled because he was so talented. Sam, Barbara, and the kids left here in the early 70s, went across the border. This rising hepatic I guess is a word for a liver person, medical star, and their son went to Vancouver. For the first half of the 70s, Sam worked out of the medical hospital connected to the University of British Columbia. Part of the motivation for moving to Vancouver was career opportunity. Part of it was moral opposition to the Vietnam War. And the protest levels that Sam participated in his conscience, for someone who's so successful, to have such a tweak and engaged conscience is a tribute to how much he was capable of. It was an act of professional courage to leave. Sam was always a person of great principle. Although they stayed in Vancouver for about half a decade, it wasn't a fit that would last. Christopher told me that his dad got depressed with all the rain up there. In '75, Sam, Barbara, and their now two boys moved back from Vancouver to the Bay Area, and they lived in Lafayette. Sam worked at the VA in Martinez, and he and Barb, Christopher, and Samuel lived there till 1982. The simple truth is Sam was so driven, smart, and dedicated that fate kept granting him opportunities they couldn't say no to. In 1983, Sam, Barbara, and Chris left the Bay Area to live in Ottawa, Canada, for what seems a mix of professional opportunities and in order to be close enough to care for Barbara's mother. Barb and Sam stayed in Ottawa for the remainder of the 1980s. In Ottawa, Sam was the chief of pathology at the hospital, and it would turn out that Ottawa would be their last professional adventure before returning to the South Bay. The big one, anyway. He traveled a lot. It was a short moments. They lived in Torrance before they bought a condo in RPV that Barbara still lives in. Palos Verdes became their permanent home. That is all the noteworthy, semi-permanent geographic wheres and whos and whats that I have to share that make up Sam's long life. Professionally, the list of accomplishments and accolades is far longer. Amazingly long, really. As most, if not all of you know, Sam's resume is worth some praise. Said simply, he was a worldwide leader in hepatic or liver disorders. Said simply, he was, by esteemed professionals, Julius Cruz, who worked closely with Sam, describe his work in phrases like a real physician's physician. More particularly, Sam was known for his research on cirrhosis-related illnesses and a unique type of liver disease called Mallory bodies. Mallory bodies, Wikipedia informs me, are psychoplasmic hyaline inclusions of hepatocytes. I feign false humility in saying I couldn't have said it better myself. Sam published 62 articles in the medical journal titled Experimental and Molecular Pathology Alone. 62 articles in one publication alone. Wow. All told, he wrote 400 original articles in 40 book chapters. For all those non-medical types in our midst today, I've chosen to categorize that number of publications as a whole lot. In his role as the chief of atomic pathology at Harbor UCLA Medical Center, Sam helped build his lab and Harbor into a center for that field of study. Sam was a member of too many professional societies to list, and it was these associations that took him frequently to Japan, where he spoke at conferences and maintained connections with a long run of protégés and colleagues. He loved the Japanese people, and likewise, he loved his colleagues in France and Italy and elsewhere, but particularly those three countries. There really is no amount of words, badges, promotions, praise, citations, or raises that can promote or encourage the kind of behavior and commitment that Sam exhibited to work, to his craft. The drive to get up regularly and leave home at 7 or so and work 13-hour days before setting foot back home has to come from within. That obsession almost has to be intrinsic To be the kind of researcher Sam was has to be a combination of who you are innately and how you prioritize your time and how you habitually train yourself. The simplest thing to say about Sam, the medical professional, was that he was smart and that he cared. His reputation with the sort of people that he mentored is amazing. He had a rare cooperative spirit, I am told, in the way that he approached patients and the way that he dealt with residents and research alike. He was smart and he had an ethic of giving. That's a very good combination for a human being. Scott was telling me that he was even handy building bird coops and baseball fields, and Sam said he's managed to get most of his sporting events even. He was also persistent enough to make sure that a diagnosis of heart issues that have kept Scott sidelined from normal activities was not left to one medical set of eyes. The truth is, Sam seemed to touch everything that he did touch thrived. His youngest two sons, following unprompted, encouraged into the medical field that he started. No caroling, no cajoling to make that happen. Linda, Scott, and Leslie, respectively, being accomplished landscape architect or designers, building realtors and psychotherapists, hairstylists, everything Sam touched thrived. Wish I knew him. At least I got to know him this way. It's a shame that we all have to age and die. Stopping those two existential truths is the chief challenge of life, you might say. They're also, in a broad sense, the chief challenge Sam spent his life to solve, right, in his own little peculiar part of the world. As a dad, he was a man of his generation. His son Sam said that he worked a lot, was calm, and a solid provider. He was a strong enough role model, as I said, that both his kids became pathologists without a word of encouragement. That says something. Outside of work and family, Sam loved traveling, and he loved tennis and classical music. He was, for all his professional status, a person who stood up for civil rights and anti-war issues. Barbara said, "We went to a lot of protests." That's impressive. Sam was bleeping impressive. Like many from his generation, a generation we've dubbed the greatest, the good doctor covered a lot of turf. He was still working, and from what I gather, pretty constructively into his 90s. In tennis jargon, Samuel did not leave much on the court. There are a lot of ways to live your life, of course. Lots of things to be curious and committed to, or not. But very few people have done as good a job, it seems to me, as matching their passions and their drive with the collective well-being of others, as Sam did. Of course, with Sam's death, Barbara and the kids and the many people in the medical community he regularly touched lose. He leaves behind 2 full handfuls of grandkids and at least 1 great-granddaughter. A number of them are here today. But with Sam's death, more than with most people, we all lose. The world loses, doesn't it? For all his hard work, it would be cosmically fairer if some people got to continue just because of what they contributed. Sadly, that is not how life works. Like many of you here whose lives will heal the lives of others you never know, I know there's a lot of medical people. You will touch more people too, touched by him. It's left for all of us to decide how much we want to dedicate to our professions, to our families, to our communities, and to those who'll never know our names, to those who'll never see the ripples. I'm grateful that Sam gave so much. Gone but not forgotten, Sam French. Gone but not forgotten. It's now time to hear from Chris and Sam, his sons.
I'm Sam, the middle son. Thank you all for coming. My dad was a driven and a successful a person, but he achieved this not at the expense of others. In fact, the opposite. He leveraged his success and his position to help others, to teach others, and to advocate for others. Because of his drive, he was actually quite busy, and so, especially in the earlier years, we didn't probably see him as often as many sons see their fathers. But on occasion, we would play tennis, and I was a bad tennis player, quite terrible, unfortunately, still am. And when things would not go my way, I would sort of exhibit poor sportsmanship, and I would actually throw my tennis racket on occasion, which, you know, was really stupid because back then they were made of wood, but he didn't react. He wouldn't get angry. He would just stay calm and project calm, and that impacted me. And I was able to get past my immaturity and proceed and to get a good tennis game in after my misbehavior. In addition to classical music, he also liked the blues. And when I was a teenager, you know, it was really difficult to get me up on Saturday mornings. I don't know if anyone else has that experience with teenage sons, but I certainly had that issue. And so his solution was crank up the blues in the morning. And I got right up because I love the blues too. B.B. King. When I was too young, I don't know, I can't remember, somewhere between 10 and 12, Mom and Dad took me to see B.B. King live, downtown San Francisco, in a club. You know, I was at least a decade younger than anyone else there, but we had a good time, and it's one of my favorite memories. Just at that age, the only issue was the 2-drink minimum. But in later years, we got to spend more time together, and that was in part because, by coincidence, we were in the same field. And so, you know, we would go to meetings, liver meetings together. And there was one time we were driving down to a meeting in San Diego, and we were near one of those bases, and you know, you could see sand dunes as far as the eye could see. And he just sort of erupted. He goes, "Well, that brings back memories." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, they had me there practicing beach landings near the end of World War II in those dunes, and in anticipation of a potential invasion of islands around Japan. Unfortunately, that never happened." So here we are today, celebrating a great pathologist, a great researcher, but in my mind, most importantly, a teacher, a helper, and an advocate. And I feel that those latter characteristics are his true legacy.
We're going to bring Chris up, and then we're going to hear a little classical music.
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm from the second family. I'm the younger brother to Sam, and did not inherit the calm that my brother did from my father. I somehow wasn't able to channel that. I didn't have confidence that I'd be able to speak off the cuff, so I apologize ahead of time. I had to actually wrote myself what I was going to read. I don't usually talk this way, but I want to make sure I don't go over the time limit. Here's my thing. So Dad used to have, this is a true story, he used to have a recurrent dream of a blackbird sitting outside of his window. He would complain about this. I don't know if other people remember this or were ever told this. He would reach out for the blackbird, and then as he got closer to it, just before he was able to grab it, it turned into a turd. A bird turd, not, and, I'm sorry?
What did it turn into?
A turd. Guano, whatever you want to call it. And by the way, I don't know, somebody might be able to educate me here, but I don't really know what's so special about a blackbird, but I know a blackbird was somehow special to my dad. And his interpretation of the dream was that he could never get what he wants, or that at least he was looking for something he could not attain. And we would speculate, we never knew what that was that he could not get. But perhaps his dream represented the source of his need to obsessively work and never be satisfied, never feel like he's achieved what he wants to achieve. I'm here to say that I think that even if he didn't agree, by most people's standards, he had a full, rich, and gratifying life. He had a productive career, 5 healthy children and grandchildren, and now apparently a great-grandchild, I just found out today, and many people who loved him, as we can see here today. And he lived to 94. That's a long time, even if some people, himself included, think that his life was cut short. I want to share a couple of ultra-short anecdotes that are examples of moments where with Dad, where his actions positively influenced my life. The first was when I was 3 years old. We were a little bit older than little Wheeler over there, who's hopefully asleep right now. We were at the deep end of a very large saltwater pool in Vancouver. At least it seemed very large at that age. I remember pleading for my dad to not let me go. I had never swam by myself before, and his response was simply just push me away. And it was basically sink or swim situation. And I remember this was a traumatic event. I was 3 years old. Fortunately, I did swim. I did not sink. And since then, I've been able to swim by myself. So that kind of changed my life. I learned that sometimes you just have to dive into something if you're hesitant. But more than that, as Sammy had alluded to, Dad, although he wasn't an athlete, he was very into fitness and staying in shape, and he was running up until like 1 or 2 years before he died. I don't know when the last time he ran. But that influenced me as well. We would go on runs routinely together. Some of our deepest conversations occurred during the running. Dad, if you knew him, sometimes he would speak indirectly. His best thoughts would occur while he's like reading current contents and not actually speaking directly to you. And that would happen when we ran too. Anyway, so even to this day, I place a premium on fitness and health, and I attribute that to my father and my mother too, by the way. Now, the second anecdote I wanted to share was when I was 7 years old. Sammy and I, so when I was 7 and Sammy was 9, we were at work with Dad, and we asked him to show us what he did for a living. We had at least I didn't know any idea at the time. The next thing we knew is he was walking us into the autopsy suite, where they were actually performing an autopsy. And not knowing what was going on, I actually thought that there was a living patient undergoing surgery. My dad asked the nurse to show us the heart of the patient. And so she dug into the chest cavity and, pulled this thing out of this mass of red and purple, dripping with blood and gore. And I can't speak for my brother Sammy, but I couldn't decide whether to vomit or pass out at the moment, at the age of 7. I just knew it was time to get the hell out of there. So Dad, probably too early, that's probably too early showing your 7-year-old an autopsy. But anyway, fast forward 20 years, next thing I know, I was starting a career as a pathologist, just like my dad. So it must have had an effect. And so, thanks.
Time for a little meditative moment musically before we hear from some tributes from the medical community. Laron and Hideo. I've not yet met Laron and Hideo. Are they both here? Why don't you come on up? Thank you.
So I'm Larry McFall. I worked at Harbor UCLA with Dr. French. So a pathologist I came to know during my residency training told me about a pathologist who was an attending of his at San Francisco General in the 1960s. He was a fantastic teacher, and he also had an office filled with cigar smoke. And after I'd been at Harbor UCLA some time, I learned that Dr. French loved cigars, but for years had only smoked them, but rarely. And so, and then I knew that he had worked at San Francisco General Hospital, and then I realized that this remarkable teacher that I worked with was the same one that I had heard about some years ago. And Dr. French was a remarkable teacher. He has a following of pathology residents from years back. Pathology residents tell me that the changes he made when he first came to Harbor UCLA in 1990 really improved their training program. And personally, reviewing cases over the microscope is a unique experience. It's really hard to describe, but it seems like we get an opinion on the case as well as maybe the science behind the opinion. Dr. French was a consultant to clinical and pathology faculty on a wide variety of cases. We even, we always show him the cytology correlation before we signed the cytology cases out. It's common to see a crowd of residents and clinicians in the office around his four-headed microscope. Teaching using the autopsy clinical pathology correlation conference was important to him from his early days in San Francisco General through the very end. Dr. French was let's see. So he first came to Harvard General Hospital when it was just a few years old, if you can imagine that. And that's where he worked with Dr. Hirosi's Morin and Fu. And he soon became department chief there. And then you've heard about his subsequent appointments, and then he came back to Harvard. He was an authority on liver disease, as you've heard, over 475 peer-reviewed papers, while carrying a significant clinical workload. He was the oldest scientist to hold an active NIH grant. He was a recipient of the Gold-Headed Cane Award from the American Society of Investigative Pathology, which is given for distinguished teaching and research, and that's a really big deal. The people who have received this are, giants in pathology. So I only saw Dr. French come to work wearing a coat and tie. He declared his opinions clearly, so we always knew exactly where he stood on an issue. And if there was a protest, as you've seen in the photos above, he could be found in the protest line and carrying the sign. But not everything was work. He was a generous host for lunch with residents and faculty. He played tennis with pathology residents early in the 90s. He hiked and skied across country, and he traveled to Japan and Europe, and he loved to eat Japanese food with itabashis. My family knew they could always find Dr. French running in our neighborhood on weekends, always at the hottest time of the day. We miss Dr. French. We miss his teaching, his mentorship, his generosity, and his friendship.
Barbara, the member of French family, distinguished guests and friends. Yes, indeed, we are saddened by the fact that we lost another giant in the field of pathology. But Sam French was more than just prolific medical investigator. He was a fantastic anatomic pathologist. He was a passionate educator and mentor, and he was a genuinely thoughtful person. As one of the beneficiaries of his friendship and professionalism, I'd like to briefly share with you my fortunate 40 years relationship I had with him. I met Sam back in 1980. At Martinez Veterans Hospital when I joined the laboratory of Professor Corey Lodgman as a postdoc fellow. As my project involves studies of pancreatitis, which is inflammatory disease of pancreas, I need to have a histological evaluation. That's how I ended up meeting him. Indeed, he made a major contribution through these collaborations, generating fantastic histological evaluation and data, and we ended up publishing several peer-reviewed articles, which we co-authored. But more importantly, he was responsible for introducing me into alcoholic liver disease field. His passion and enthusiasm was so contagious, and I could not refuse getting into that field, and ended up shifting my primary research focus from pancreatitis to alcoholic liver disease. I didn't know what I was doing then, but this was very important turning point and lucky turning point of my career. In 1982, he left for Ottawa because he became chairman of pathology by University of Ottawa. But nearly 2 decades later, the fate brought us back together in LA. Sam was back at Harvard UCLA. I was recruited by University of Southern California. So I quickly called him up and teamed up with additional 2 prominent investigators in this area to establish NIH-funded National Center for Alcoholic Liver Disease and Pancreatic Diseases. So this is truly a fate, because I was doing pancreatic research. He introduced alcoholic liver disease. Finally, many years later, I was fortunate enough to direct this Center for Alcoholic Liver and Pancreatic Diseases. Now, as one of the original center investigator, Sam French was, and also he was a director for Center's Morphology Core. He provided fantastic service. I mean, because he had unmatched pathological expertise and such exceptional scientific wisdom, which really helped the young scientists, not only among the center communities, but across the nation or even around the globe. And he really amazed everyone with his insatiable craving for new scientific discoveries and knowledge. At his age of 90s, he was attending most key national meetings and visiting all those poster presentations and talking to each one of those presenters, taking a note, asking questions. And he was just impossible. He was amazing. I think I have never seen anybody like him in my life. And I have no doubt he was thinking about the science until his last days. We lost him, but his genuine love and spirit for the science stay within us, all of us, who are touched upon by him in his lifetime. To that end, and to honor his legacy, we will establish the lectureship named after him, Samuel French Memorial Lectureship. And we hope that inaugural lectureship will take place in forthcoming Center Symposium in December. And God bless Dr. French and Dr. French's family, and may he rest in eternal peace. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a little work to do. There's a responsive reading on your order of service in the back with the cigar photograph up top. I wrote a little responsive reading for him for all of us to have some say. And then I'm gonna invite anyone who wishes to come down. We're gonna light candles. If anyone wants to just share a word or a memory or two, we can do that as well. When we meet people who embrace their work for the betterment of all, all right, I want you to do better than that. You ready? Sam would be disappointed. When we meet people who embrace their work for the betterment of all, there we go. When we meet consummate professionals with surprising senses of humor, when we greet your friends and colleagues in Canada, Japan, Italy, France, and beyond, when we gather together physically and virtually with those here today, a time to come up. I'm going to light a candle, and then people can light candles off of that and just share this microphone, and I'll swab it down so it's relatively clean. And you can share a memory of our good doctor and father and whoever Sam was to you. Not all at once.
Hi, my name Mary Lay. Can you hear me? Oh, okay. And I was Dr. French's resident in pathology. And I just want to highlight him as a teacher. That when I joined pathology, it was my second career in medicine. It was a different career in medicine. And, you know, as a student, you have your own doubts. But when Dr. French believed in you, you rose to the occasion and you rose to his belief in you. And in talking to all the residents that he has touched, we mark our days. We mark our days by the education with him. We mark our careers by the education with him. And I really rose to his belief in me. And so I want to thank all my attendings, but the one thing that he brought to us was the best of ourselves. He really brought out the best of us, the best of me, the best of my career in pathology, and you emulate his enthusiasm in pathology. And I want to give sympathy to the family because we also feel our own loss of a teacher as well. Thank you.
Hi, Barbara, Sam, Scott, Chris. This is Yvonne. I come from Sacramento, UC Davis. I know Sam and have been interacting with him for longer than 30 years. We worked together at Harvard UCLA for 12 years. Our labs were right next to each other. Then I moved to Kansas, University of Kansas. Our collaboration continued, and the whole family visited me, and I had the pleasure to know your science and work together continuously. And I was surprised that even I moved to UC Davis for another 9 years, our collaboration continued. Now we have one publication, both we have 2 semi-French names on it, both initial SWF. There was one time I asked why everybody's name start SWF. Sam told me, I want more pups. So anyway, he did it. I'm just found myself extremely fortunate to have a father figure. He's not only a teacher, he's an educator. And he is a role model, and he's an icon. I found myself so fortunate to be associated with him, and the relationship can continue. Thank you.
Hello. I gotta be strong. Okay, I'm Adriana, for those of you that don't know me. I work with Dr. French since he arrived at Harvard, and he arrived in 1990, so I had been working for him since then. I didn't know what a research grant was until he introduced me to one, all that typing. But Dr. French was a father figure to many of us. The residents, he loved his residents. And there's some alumni are here. We couldn't invite everybody because of COVID. But I'm glad some of them are here. Dr. French had over 150 alumni. Up to now, I stopped counting at 150. He had many medical students that came through his through the residency program, many observers that he gave an opportunity to get into our residency program. Some benefited from that. He also, his research lab, there are many of his researchers here. He gave everybody an opportunity, students, high school students. If you came knocking at his door saying, can you take my son, my daughter, he never said no. So he cared about everybody. So God bless Dr. French.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Fauzia. I worked in Dr. French's lab for years. I feel privileged that I knew him, he was my boss, and he was my mentor. Where do I start? Dr. French is a life inspiration. Yes. I always think, what would he do? Well, how would he approach this situation? How would he resolve? His door was always opened. The residents, the doctors, he was always ready to read the slides. All the investigators for the institution, they all need Dr. French to read their slide. Through his mentoring, I was able to publish so many papers, to secure safe funding. That was his encouragement. He was always worried about that. His gentle, positive way and is always oriented to find a solution. As I mentioned, his door was always opened. And then he was always thinking about new idea, a new paper, science. We worked together for, even after I left his lab, we were still working together. Even recently, I have an abstract, and it was submitted, and we will have more work, and he will be publishing. We worked together even the last moment. In his bed, he was fighting for his life, but he was having idea, reading, and preparing a grant to submit to get funded. Dr. French's smile, warm, engaging personality, pleasant demeanor will not be forgotten. He's greatly missed. Much love to you, Barb, and to his family.
I just wanted to say something about Dr. French and what he meant to me and how much influence he had. And I was hearing Dr. French Jr.'s story about the tennis thing and how influence from using a very, I don't know what to say, his approach was very, how he influenced Sam to have a better demeanor and everything. And that's what Dr. French meant for me too. He really influenced a lot of us too. Without meandering, I want to just talk about how he influenced me. Like med school was a very harsh discipline, and I had, when I was younger, I had a much harsher demeanor too, just like Dr. French Jr. was saying too, but his approach was so like flowing and everything, and it taught me, and I've become a director myself too, and how to deal with people, and it's like just to flow with things, and it really has meant a lot to me. I would say he almost probably saved, medicine stopped being fun for me until I met him again, and I went to residency, and I was able to try, I was able to glean so much, and I loved seeing his, we shared a passion for Buddhism, Buddhist philosophy later in life. And his gentle smile was just like seeing it just was very calming to me too, and it just he's meant a lot to a lot of us residents truly, and how his approach to everything is too. Just wanted to say.
Hello everyone, I'm a current resident at Harvard UCLA Pathology. I have known Dr. French for the last 2 years, and I was especially touched by two of his qualities. First of all, his work ethics, his passion for his work. He truly loved his work, and then like that, he became a very good model for me, like many of us. And secondly, his simplicity. His smile was so genuine. And as a new resident, we did not know many of the things. We did not have any fear, any hesitation when we had a question. We could go to him at any time, and he would break down everything in such a simple way that, it did not make us feel any bad for asking, and it was very pleasant to work with him. I interviewed him before joining Harvard UCLA Pathology. I still remember in his office in the corner there was a little bike. It looked like a kid's toy. And it was the whole conversation during interview was so easygoing. Then I asked him, Dr. Franz, what is that the kid's toy? Then he smiled and he lifted the receiver, and then he said, it is actually a phone, and it is a Christmas gift for me. And after the interview, I remember I shared with my mom. Mom, today I interviewed with a senior attending, and he has two of his kids are also pathologists, very renowned pathologists. Then my mom said, oh, he must be a very good father and mentor. Then it ended up that I finally joined Harvard UCLA Pathology, and he continued to be a very good mentor to me, set very good example for good work ethics. He's truly missed in the department. When I passed by the corridor, the room feels so empty. I looked again to convince myself, no, he's not there anymore. Also, our autopsy conferences, it does not feel like the same like it used to be when he was there. With all the organs laid down, he would examine each by each, asking questions. He had a very good sense of humor. And then after the conference, he again asked, so what is the cause of death? So we had to make sure to prepare the conferences really well, presentations, so that we could answer all of his questions, especially if it was alcoholic liver disease. Mallory waste body, we have to make sure we take good picture of Mallory waste bodies. I knew about it. It was a textbook knowledge for me before I actually learned with Dr. French what it is and what does it mean. So there are a lot of things. Dr. French is full of stories, amazing to me. There are a lot of things that I want to learn from him, I want to follow in my life. I wish it was another occasion, not this Memorial Day, to speak for him. I wish it was his birthday when we used to celebrate with all our co-residents and with all the other attendings. With that, I want to conclude. May God give his soul peace in eternity. Thank you.
I invite you to decide now what forever you want to remember about Sam. Create a visual of when you were with him, of him. Lift it up and hold it to the silence. Dear Samuel, we commit you to the next phase. Lost to us in physical form, here we commit you back to God's love and care, to the places that all things go, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Deep peace of the running wave to you, deep peace of the flowing air to you, Samuel, deep peace of the quiet earth to you, deep peace of the shining stars to you. Amen. Blessings to you, Sam. Please join one another outside. We have some food and refreshments and for collation. We'll hope the weather holds. Thank you for being here. Amen.